record low error rate, under 8 in 10,000 on the toughest kind of quantum benchmark there is. And it wasn't hardware that got Google there this time. It was an AI watching the dials. That's the stakes, and that's where we're headed. Today on Quickly Quantum, can reinforcement learning solve one of quantum computing's most boring, most important problems? Keeping a machine calibrated while it's still running. Before that, in the headlines, a $55 million boost for a Midwest quantum supply chain. A diamond-based quantum computer hits the commercial market. And, this one's a fun gut check, an ordinary laptop just solved a problem people assumed needed a quantum computer. Welcome back to Quickly Quantum, your daily brief on the quantum frontier. It's Tuesday, July 21st, 2026. Let's get into it. Now, let's start with money moving into American quantum manufacturing. The Block Quantum Tech Hub, led by the Chicago Quantum Exchange, just landed a $30 million award from the Economic Development Administration. And here's the part that matters more. That award unlocks another $25 million in matching funds, bringing the total to $55 million. The hub spans Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana, part of what's been nicknamed the Quantum Prairie, and it's pulling in commitments from the University of Chicago, Inflection, IonQ, and IBM, among others. The goal is straightforward and, frankly, overdue. Build a real U.S. supply chain for quantum hardware components, so the industry isn't leaning on foreign suppliers for the specialized parts these machines need. Now, I'll add the obvious caveat. Government tech hub grants have a track record of long gaps between the award ceremony and actual manufacturing capacity coming online. So this is a multi-year bet, not a switch that flips tomorrow. Still, $55 million is real capital, aimed at a real gap in the supply chain. Now, sticking with IonQ for a second, though this one comes with an asterisk. IonQ and Quantum Basel put out a joint study arguing that as quantum hardware scales up, hybrid quantum classical AI workloads could gain real energy efficiency advantages over running everything on GPUs alone. The pitch isn't aimed at you and me. It's aimed at data center operators drowning in AI's power bills, with quantum framed as a way to take some of that load off the grid. Now, the caveat. This is a vendor-commissioned study, and it's projecting energy advantages for future, larger quantum systems, not something measured on hardware running today. We haven't independently confirmed the underlying numbers ourselves either. It fits a bigger narrative you've probably heard from IonQ this week already, that quantum could help offset AI's ballooning energy appetite. Promising direction, sure, but for now, treat it as a thesis the company wants you to believe, not a deployed result. Now, a new modality just walked onto the commercial floor. A company called Saxon Q announced commercial availability of diamond-based quantum computing systems built around what's called an NV center, a nitrogen vacancy defect inside a diamond lattice that can hold and manipulate a qubit. The pitch. These systems can operate at higher temperatures than superconducting rivals like Google's or IBM's, meaning less exotic and cheaper cooling infrastructure. That's a genuine potential advantage on cost and simplicity. Now, the reality check. This is a company press release. There's no independent third-party benchmarking of performance cited, and Diamond NV Center qubits remain far behind the leaders in both qubit count and error rates. File this as a new player entering a crowded field with a real physical advantage on paper, not a machine about to outcompete Willow or IBM's fleet anytime soon. Now, one for the infrastructure nerds, and honestly, this matters more than it sounds. A team spanning AWS, NVIDIA, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and NASA published a joint study laying out an actual quantitative framework for when a quantum processor needs to sit right next to a classical supercomputer versus when a standard cloud connection is good enough. Right now, a lot of quantum HPC, high-performance computing, integration gets decided ad hoc, project by project. This gives cloud providers and national labs an engineering model instead of a guess, which matters as hybrid quantum classical workloads become the norm rather than the exception. Think of it as the zoning code for how future quantum data centers get built, where the quantum chip has to live in the same room as the supercomputer and where it can just phone it in over the network. Not a flashy headline, but exactly the kind of unglamorous groundwork that determines how usable these systems actually are once they leave the lab. Now, hold on to that infrastructure thought, because our next story is about who pays for all of it. A long thread from the X account at NetCreate has been circulating in quantum investing circles, and it's worth engaging with directly. At NetCreate argues the market is underpricing IonQ's strategic expansion. the company's push beyond core quantum computing into networking and sensing, treating it as a distraction when it's actually, in their view, a genuine ecosystem advantage the stock hasn't been credited for. Now, the other side of this, reflected across broader financial coverage of quantum stocks, IonQ keeps tapping equity markets to fund that expansion, and every raise dilutes existing shareholders while revenue stays thin relative to the spending. That's the live tension in quantum investing right now. Is the ecosystem bet smart diversification, or is it dilution dressed up as strategy? I'll say this, it's a real debate, and at NetCreate's take is one investor's analysis, not verified financial research. Worth reading, not worth treating as settled. Now here's a genuine reality check, and I like leading with this one because it cuts against the hype in a healthy way. Researchers used a technique called tensor network compression, essentially a clever way of squeezing down the mathematical description of an entangled quantum system so a classical computer can handle it, to simulate a quantum dynamics problem involving hundreds of entangled qubits. And they did it on an ordinary laptop, matching both the theoretical predictions and results from actual quantum hardware simulations. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea, this isn't quantum computers are pointless. The caveat matters. This applies to specific, structured problems that happen to compress well with tensor networks, not a general claim that quantum hardware is unnecessary. But it's a useful reminder that the bar for genuine quantum advantage keeps moving, because classical simulation techniques are improving right alongside the quantum hardware. Any advantage claim needs to be checked against what a laptop, with the right math, can already do. Which, funnily enough, sets up our main story pretty well, because today's big result isn't about beating classical computers, it's about keeping quantum hardware itself running long enough to matter. Our main story today, teaching a quantum computer to fix itself while it's still running. Call it the recalibration problem, and it's one of the least sexy, most important bottlenecks in this entire field. Here's what happened. Google Quantum AI and DeepMind published a paper in Nature showing a reinforcement learning agent, an AI that learns by trial and error, getting better through feedback rather than explicit programming, that can continuously recalibrate a quantum processor's control settings while error correction is actively running, instead of pausing the whole computation to do maintenance. Now, here's the newcomer bridge, because this one needs it. Qubits, the basic units of quantum information, are exquisitely sensitive, and their control parameters drift over time because of tiny changes in temperature, noise, and the electronics driving them. Left alone, that drift degrades performance, so today's quantum computers have to periodically stop everything and recalibrate. The same way a violin creeps out of tune over a long concert, and the player has to pause and retune mid-performance. That's fine for short demonstrations. It's a real problem for fault-tolerant quantum computing, the long-sought goal of building reliable, error-corrected machines, because the whole point of fault tolerance is running long, complex computations without interruption. You can't get there if the machine has to keep stopping to retune itself. So what did they actually build? The team tested the RL agent on Google's Willow superconducting chip and had it manage over 1,000 control parameters simultaneously and in real time. Under deliberately injected hardware drift, stress testing it against the kind of degradation a real machine experiences, the agent cut logical error rates by roughly 20 to 31% and improved stability by up to 3.5 times compared to the old approach of fixed, periodic calibration. And in the process, it hit a new record, a logical error rate of 7.72 times 10 to the minus 4 per cycle on what's called a distance 7 surface code. Quick gloss: a surface code stitches together many imperfect physical qubits into one much more reliable logical qubit, and the distance is roughly how much redundancy is built in. Higher distance generally means better protection, at the cost of needing more physical qubits. Now, here's the number that really matters for where this is headed. Simulations in the paper suggest this approach can scale to roughly 40,000 control parameters, the kind of scale you'd need for a distance 15 surface code, and crucially, the agent's convergence speed, how fast it learns to compensate, doesn't seem to depend on how big the system gets. That's the whole ballgame for scaling. If recalibration overhead grew with system size the way a lot of engineering challenges do, it would be a hard ceiling on how big and how long-running these machines could ever be. This is the kind of unglamorous plumbing work that rarely makes headlines outside the field, but engineers focused on fault tolerance have flagged calibration overhead as one of the quiet ceilings on scaling, right up there with error rates and qubit connectivity. So how solid is this, really? On the corroboration side, pretty solid. The same 20 to 31% error reduction and stability improvement numbers show up not just in the Nature paper itself, but in the arXiv preprint and independently in write-ups from Converge Digest, Hyper AI, Quantum Computing Report, and the Next platform. When that many independent outlets converge on the same figures pulled from the same underlying paper, that's not proof of importance, but it does mean we're not chasing a single inflated press release. The numbers are what they say they are. Now here's where I want to slow down, because the skeptic case is specific and worth stating plainly. The experimental result, the actual hardware run on Willow, was demonstrated only at modest code distances, 5 and 7. The headline scaling number, that 40,000 parameter distance 15 case, is a simulation, not something that ran on real hardware. So the claim that this scales cleanly to fault-tolerant sized systems is a projection based on modeling, not something Google has actually shown a chip do yet. And it's worth being precise about what kind of advance this is. It's a control engineering and machine learning result, not a new qubit count record or a new algorithmic capability. Nobody ran a bigger or more useful computation because of this. What changed is how the machine stays usable over time. I say that not to deflate it, because I actually think this is one of the more important papers of the year in this field, just not for the reason a casual headline would suggest. Here's my read. The entire fault-tolerant roadmap has always had this unglamorous assumption buried in it, that someone would eventually solve the machine has to keep stopping to retune itself problem before long, useful computations become possible. This paper is a serious, credible attempt at exactly that, and the fact that convergence speed doesn't scale with system size is the detail that should make specialists sit up, because that's precisely the kind of hidden scaling tax that turns "we can do this in principle" into "we can't actually build it." And this isn't just Google's problem to solve for Google. Every group racing toward fault tolerance, superconducting and trapped ion camps alike, faces some version of this drift issue, because it's physics, not a design flaw specific to one company. If that simulated result holds up on real hardware as chips grow, and that's a real if, it removes one of the quieter obstacles between where the field is now and a machine that can run long enough to be genuinely useful. What I'll be watching next is whether Google or anyone else runs this agent on real chips at higher code distances. That's the number that would actually confirm the scaling claim, not another simulation. Time for the hype check. I'm putting this one at a 6. The hardware demonstration is real, the cross-source corroboration on the numbers is strong, and the underlying problem it's attacking, calibration overhead, is a genuine, widely acknowledged bottleneck, not a manufactured one. But the number designed to grab headlines, the 40,000 parameter scaling claim, is simulation, not silicon, and this is fundamentally a control systems advance dressed in the language of a breakthrough. Real progress, honestly reported by the outlets covering it. Just don't let the record error rate number do more work in your head than the evidence supports yet. These are the kinds of quiet engineering wins that don't move stock prices, but do move timelines, worth watching as Google and others report results at bigger code distances. If this show's useful to you, hit follow wherever you're listening so tomorrow's episode finds you automatically. This has been Quickly Quantum, an AI-voiced podcast, created and built by a real human using today's cutting-edge technology. Nothing you heard on this show is financial advice. I'm Brian Lampert, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Take care.